Okay, this is going to be a quick tutorial on creating a temple ruin in cryengine. So the first part of this is just going to be a really quick kind of rundown of how to create a bit of terrain. In this case I'm going to do it in geocontrol. So you can get a trial for this for your computers at home. Or you can buy it, I think it's about 80 quid or something, so it's not really that expensive for what you get with it. So when you have geocontrol, what you want to do is you want to find the easiest way to work with this is to find a preset that you like, and then kind of mess around with that from that point. So I'm going to use this canyon, and I'm going to first of all I'm going to start working at 256 actually. So the bigger the terrain size is, this is basically what kind of res it's going to be rendering out at. So the higher that is, the longer it takes to render. So if I leave that 256 and hit generate, that should just take a few seconds to generate the terrain. So I can kind of get a bit of a preview of what it's going to look like. That'll obviously start to take quite a long time once that value comes up. So for the moment what I can do is there's this check here, keep seed. If I untick this, it'll basically randomly generate a different surface every time I hit generate. So what we can do is we can just take the keep seed off, and then we can keep on generating a landscape until we get one that we like the look of, and then we can generate, or we can render out that one that we liked at a much higher resolution. So this one looks quite cool. I think I could kind of build a temple up on that area there, kind of overlooking this. Maybe even fill this with some water or something. Might be quite nice. So now that I'm happy with this, I'm just going to click keep seed, and that way it won't generate a different terrain over the top of this, and then I can render this out. So I'm going to render this out at 2048. The other things to keep in mind with geocontrol are to get the best results out of this, it's usually best to bake the sunlight into the actual texture. So you can see here that the shadow is kind of coming from the top left. So we can actually move the sun's position around. So it's a good idea to plan where you're going to have the sun. And actually, if I'm going to put my temple here, what I'm thinking is it'd be quite nice to have the sun kind of shining straight into the temple and through the front, kind of the front entrance of it, so that when you're inside you get like a nice kind of sort of flare coming off that sun. So the best way to do that is just to have a bit of a mess around, to be honest. So let's just try it at 219 and see if that looks better. That looks a bit better. In fact, that's not too bad. Just a little bit further round again. That's looking pretty good. I mean, it doesn't have to be completely perfect, but the closer we can get it, the kind of the better. And I'm just going to increase the sun height as well, because I think this is going to be more sort of in the middle of the day. So that's looking pretty good. Now that I'm happy with all of that, I can go back to this general tab here, and I can render that out at, I'm going to render it out at 2048. You might want to render this out at 4096 and get a really crisp height map and a crisp texture map as well, colour map, but that'll take ages, so I'm just going to do 2048 and hit generate. So I'll pause this video and start it again once that's done. Okay, so that's that took about 10 or 15 minutes, I think, and this is our result. So it's looking quite nice. Just whilst we're in geocontrol, just want to kind of quickly go over another way of using this, which is if you want to use a height map that you've already got. So it might be a height map that you've downloaded from one of the kind of sites off the internet where you can get real world data. So you might want to get real world data for like the pyramids around Giza. You can bring that in, so you can you can import that as a terrain texture, and then what you can do is this slider here, protect terrain up to level. Basically, the higher that goes, the more the less the terrain will get changed. So you can basically use this to kind of keep all of the height data intact, but then you can still use the presets in here to kind of generate a little bit of the kind of flow of the terrain, and also some of the colour, well, in fact all of the colour underneath it, and really it's the colour that's baked into this texture that's the thing that's really hard to kind of hand paint. So actually making this height map wouldn't necessarily be too hard, but then to paint all of this texture into that height map would be a really big task. So yeah, it's a good way of kind of getting that generated for you. So now that we've got this rendered, what we want to do is we want to go to View, Colouring, and we want to make sure that Use Shader is ticked, and that just means that the colour that we're seeing in the preview is what will get kind of baked out of this. So if I go to View, Colouring, and I go to like one of these other ones, we'll get different colour maps put over the top of it, which actually can be quite useful, because sometimes it's good to use these other colour maps and blend them in Photoshop. But for the moment we'll just make sure that Use Shader is ticked. So now we just need to export our geometry, or export our height map and our colour map. So if we go to Generation and Terrain Export, and we need to export as a raw 16-bit, just because that's what CryEngine wants to use. So I've made a folder in my CryEngine called Terrains. I've already done this one, so I'm just going to save over the top of the one I've already done. So this is our height map. So that's it now, that's saved out, and we also want to save out our colour map. So Generation, Image, Export, Colour, Bitmap. It needs to be a bitmap. That's just, again, that's what CryEngine wants. And I'll save over this one. Okay, so that's all done now and saved out. We can go over to CryEngine. Just start this up. So let's create a new level. Right, we rendered this out, the terrain out at 2048, so we want to keep the terrain size at 2048. So I'll do that at 1 meter per unit. Terrain size is now 2048 by 2048. I'm going to call this Temple Ruin 2 because I already did one earlier. Click OK. OK that. We can generate a surface texture at 1024, or you can just cancel that. Actually, we don't need the surface texture for the moment. So now that we're in cryengine, let's go to our terrain tool, edit terrain, and let's bring in the height map. So file, import height map, and that's the one we want, temple height map. So obviously this has come in like way too steep, so let's just modify reduce range a few times. That's probably about right now. We'll save that. And cryengine always tends to crash at this point, so I'll stop the video and start it again. So yeah, like I said, cryengine always crashes for me when I do that. So I've just loaded it back into where we were. So I've got my terrain in, and I think this is where I was thinking of putting the temple. Somewhere in there, so you can kind of see out over the landscape. So I might just drop in there and see what it looks like. And I think that's going to look quite cool in there. So the next thing we want to do is bring in our colour map. So terrain, import terrain texture. We want to make sure that this adds up to a 2048 texture resolution, as that's what we exported it out at. So let's just change each of these tiles to be 1024. You've got to do them one at a time, unfortunately. So that's fine, that adds up to a 2K texture. So let's just select all of those tiles and click import and find our texture. That's it, and there we go. The only thing that we need to do now is save again and generate surface texture. So I recommend at some point you want to do this at least 2048. For the moment, let's just do one at 1024 so that it's a bit quicker. And again, I'll pause this now. Okay, so our generate surface texture should be finished, and you probably won't notice too much difference in the way it looks generating the surface texture at that resolution, but you will notice that the frame rate goes up quite considerably when you do that. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to stick a texture onto this surface. You'll probably notice as well that I'm hitting save quite a lot in cryengine, and that's just because it crashes all the time, so it's a good habit to get into. So yeah, texture. So click on terrain, texture. Let's just change our default texture to something. We might as well change this to, I think there's a sand texture. So terrain, beach, white sand. So just make sure that's selected in the material editor, and then assign material in there. And there we go. And let's just, to get rid of this checkerboard as well. Oh, in fact, sorry, no, the checkerboard won't be there because the base colour that's underneath this is the one that we've imported. So that's kind of okay. What we could definitely do doing as well on here is just creating a new texture. So add a new layer, and then let's find some kind of rock. I think these rock cliff. So these ones here, these are like 3D textures, so they have different texture coordinates for like the vertical space. It basically means that when you put them on areas that are kind of quite steep, they just they kind of fit nicer over the terrain. So we'll use one of these, let's say that one, and assign that material. Now we can just go into our terrain painting tools, so terrain layer painter, and in fact I should have named these, so let's go back in and name that top one sand and that bottom one cliff or rock or something. And now, right, so we can see our two textures in there. What we want to do when we're painting these textures, we want to make sure that the hardness is set to 0. Otherwise, when we're painting, it'll paint over this base colour map that we've got that kind of is defining the shape of our terrain, or following the shape of our terrain, I should say. So make sure that's set to 0. That's kind of really important. And then turn the radius up a bit, and then we can paint this in some of these areas. Another thing that might be quite useful is to we can choose what angle to paint on, so we can basically tell it to only paint on areas that are more than at a 45-degree angle. So now if I try and paint down here, it shouldn't work. So you can see that's not painting on there, but as soon as the angle gets to about 45 degrees, it'll start painting. So 45 degrees actually looks as though that's working kind of okay. So now I've got that set up, what I can do is just zoom right out and just turn our radius up to something huge like 1000 and just paint the whole lot. So it kind of goes a bit slow when you're doing this, but just make sure that we've got it all covered. Do this corner. Okay, that should be done now. Zoom back in. Now we've got like a decent looking texture on our cliffs as well. So you can see some of these seams like down there, that'll go away once we generate our surface texture again. I don't actually like this texture, so I'm just going to find another one. So now that we've painted that on, we can just kind of experiment with trying to load in some different textures into here, assign them and see what they look like. This is maybe a bit better. In fact, that one's better. So this limestone one, that's better. That's much more kind of the thing, the sort of look, I think. So let's save again and generate surface texture. File, generate surface texture. Let's just do it 1024. In fact, I'll do it 2048 this time. And I'll pause the video. Okay, so that generate surface texture is finished, and that's our terrain kind of set up, ready to put this temple in. It mostly looks okay. I'm not sure, it's kind of a weird specular coming off this. I think that might actually be baked into the surface, the colour map, so I probably want to go and kind of reduce that a bit in Photoshop, just by editing that bitmap that we brought in. So this bitmap here that we've imported, I could just go into Photoshop and kind of mess with that a little bit. So what else? Okay, so one thing that we haven't done is we want to make sure that our sun is in the correct place on this map. So when we baked this texture, the sun was kind of coming from this direction up at the top. The sun at the moment is just right in the middle of the screen, so let's just go to terrain and lighting, and where's this gone? This is probably off on the other screen. Okay, I'll just pause this a sec.